Hey everyone, today we're talking about something super interesting, the history of clothing in ancient Mesopotamia. This story goes way back to the early days of human culture, and it's full of cool ideas, inventions, and myths that make it really fun to explore. So let's start with a story you might have heard. In the Bible, Adam and Eve are said to be the first to make clothes. After eating the forbidden fruit, they realized they were naked and sewed fig leaves together. But this wasn't just about covering up. It was a big moment that symbolized a shift, a move away from being part of nature to becoming something more human, more advanced. And if the Garden of Eden was based on Sumer, as some believe, you could say the first clothes were basically made in Mesopotamia. Clothing wasn't just something people wore to stay warm or decent. It had a lot of meaning. When Adam and Eve put on those fig leaves, they were showing they had changed, that they were different from animals. There's a similar story in the ancient epic of Gilgamesh. In it, a wild man named Enkidu meets a woman who teaches him about human life. After they spend time together, she gives him clothes, and that's when he becomes fully human. It's a powerful moment where clothing symbolizes civilization. Now let's talk about how people actually made clothes back then. Archaeologists say humans have been working with fibers for tens of thousands of years. As far back as 25,000 years ago, people were twisting, sewing, and braiding plant fibers. By about 10,000 years ago, farmers in the Near East were raising sheep and goats for wool and growing plants like flax and cotton for threads. In Mesopotamia, wool was the most common material, while linen was fancier and more expensive. Cotton didn't show up until around 700 BCE, when the Assyrians brought it from Egypt and Sudan. And silk? That came much later, when the Romans started importing it all the way from China. People didn't just use plain fabrics either. They added color with dyes made from plants. But the fanciest color of all was purple. This wasn't just any purple. It came from a special shellfish called the murex, found near Lebanon and Syria. It was so valuable that the Greeks named the region Phoenicia, which means purple land. Wearing purple back then was like wearing gold today. It showed you were rich and important. So how did people make all these textiles? Mesopotamia had plenty of materials like wool and flax, along with hard-working people and busy merchants to trade the goods. The textile industry was huge, but it wasn't like factories today. Instead, families and small groups worked from their homes, spinning and weaving on looms. We even see pictures of these tools in ancient art, giving us a peek into how they worked. Here's the tricky part. Textiles are made from materials that break down over time, so most of them didn't survive. This makes it hard for archaeologists to figure out exactly what people wore. Most of what we know comes from sculptures and carvings, which usually show the clothing of rich and powerful people. Sadly, that means we don't know much about what everyday folks wore. And the Sumerians left behind small statues that offer a window into how they dressed. These tiny figurines often show men in long robes that left one shoulder bare, or in pleated skirts made from sheepskin or leather. These skirts were practical yet stylish, reflecting their culture's creativity. Women, on the other hand, wore long, simple tunics that reached their ankles. These tunics were likely easy to move around in and perfect for daily activities. On the famous royal standard of yore, noblemen are depicted with clean-shaven faces and neatly dressed in belted skirts. Soldiers wore hooded capes, which not only identified them but might have provided some protection. Even in these ancient times, clothing served multiple purposes beyond just practicality. It communicated status, role, and identity. When it comes to Babylonian and Assyrian royalty, their outfits were nothing short of magnificent. These rulers used their clothing to show off their wealth and power. For instance, on the black stone engraved with Hammurabi's code, King Hammurabi is seen standing attentively before the sun god. He's wearing a long flowing robe draped elegantly over his left arm. The god's gown is equally impressive, with a skirt featuring 5 flounced layers that cascade beautifully. Another striking example comes from the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. In one stone carving, he's shown on a hunt, wearing a tunic embroidered with intricate floral patterns. The details in the embroidery speak volumes about the craftsmanship and effort that went into creating royal attire. Later, in a peaceful garden scene, King Ashurbanipal is seen enjoying wine with Queen Ashurheret. The queen's outfit is even more elaborate, with a double tunic, a fringed shawl, and her hair styled in tight, ornate curls made shiny with oil. These visual representations highlight how royalty used their clothing to emphasize their elegance, power, and sophistication. Now let's shift our focus to the everyday folks of Mesopotamia. Their clothing was far simpler, but just as important for understanding their lives. Men likely wore short skirts or kilts, which were easy to work in, while women wore basic tunics. These garments were practical for the physical labor many of them performed daily. In colder weather, they might have added wraps or shawls for extra warmth. Unlike today, where fashion trends change rapidly, Mesopotamian clothing remained consistent and functional over long periods. This simplicity underscores how clothing for commoners prioritized comfort and utility over style. Interestingly, some clues about everyday clothing come from outside Mesopotamia. The tomb of Khnumhotep in ancient Egypt, dating back to around 1900 BCE, features paintings of Semitic immigrants. These paintings show men wearing fringed kilts and women dressed in brightly patterned shifts. The dresses have designs like stripes, polka dots, and geometric patterns in vibrant colors. Although this isn't directly from Mesopotamia, it gives us a good idea of how ordinary people in the region might have dressed. These individuals, with their modest belongings and simple clothes, seem to represent a lifestyle similar to that of Mesopotamian commoners. Herodotus, a Greek historian from the 5th century BCE, also gives us an invaluable description of Babylonian clothing. He noted that Babylonians wore long linen tunics that reached their feet, layered with wool tunics on top and short white cloaks. Their shoes had a unique style, and they carried walking sticks with ornate carvings of apples, roses, or other designs at the top. Herodotus also described how they kept their hair long, wore turbans, and used perfumes. These details bring Babylonian fashion to life, showing us how even small accessories, like walking sticks, could add a personal touch to someone's look. By piecing together what's left from art, statues, and writings, we get a richer picture of Mesopotamian clothing. The diversity in their attire reflects their social hierarchy, cultural values, and daily lives. Whether it was the luxurious robes of kings or the practical kilts of farmers, every outfit tells a story about life in one of the world's first civilizations.